We're looking at Psalms 56, and it's a very interesting psalm. It's kind of small, like the small ones we've seen before, 13 verses, a lot compacted into this. The idea it begins with "Be merciful upon me, O God," and giving you a little spoiler for tomorrow, 57 begins with the same timbre. And we saw yesterday that the psalm was about the sustaining of God. And it seems like that daily we come in at zero, we come in on empty, and we have to go back and look for sustaining and look for his mercy. Be merciful upon me. Many times we do have this sense of I am a failing, or I'm a failure, or I'm struggling constantly. Why can't I get past this? And instead of God always keeping his thumb on us, he wants us to be reaching out to him. It says, for man would swallow me up, he fights daily, oppressing me. The idea that we do feel oppressed even daily, struggling with finances, struggling with relationships, struggling with dreams and with family. Mine enemies would daily swallow me up. What time I am afraid, I will trust in you. Now, there's a powerful one. And again, he is very ergonomic about his words. What time I am afraid, it's at the point of I'm afraid is that I need to trust. It's easy to put trust when I'm not standing in a place of fear, but when I'm moving into a place with fear, that's when I go to trust. In God I will praise his word. I will put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do unto me. Jesus even referenced some of this when he talked about, what will a man give for his own soul? Consider the lilies. All of these preachings come back to, don't fear man. What can he do to you? Jesus even talked about that. Every day they wrestle my words. All their thoughts are against me evil. They garner themselves. They hide themselves. They mark my steps. They're watching me, watching to see if I fall, or they're watching for ways to trip me up. Shall they escape by iniquity? In thine anger cast them down, O God. He's calling to the God of the universe. Again, look at when you use the word God, when you use the word Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, and the word Lord as in capital L, little o, little r, little d. When you're talking about God, you're saying for God, who is the God of all the worlds, of all the nations, to take care of these people. And that's where his responsibility lays. Jehovah's responsibility lies with the nation of Israel and the covenant that was made. Adonai is actually going back. Adonai goes back to, of course, to Abraham. But that's that familiar, personal God. So sometimes when you talk to God, you need to find out in which genre. I mean, if your dad was a judge and he was also your provider, but he was also your friend. So you would go to him because of where you are in your situations. Sometimes legally you go to him because he's a judge. Sometimes familiar you go to him because he's a dad. And sometimes you go to him because he's a friend. So these are the different levels of where we can approach God, not just and if if you want him to deal with something in a more larger sense, you go to Elohim. If you do something in a covenant natural sense, you go to Yahweh. Something that's personal, go to, of course, to Adonai. He says, thou tellest my wanderings and put my tears in a bottle. Are they not in thy book? You know about my tears. You know about crying. So when I cry unto thee, shall mine enemies turn back? This I know, for God is with me. We'll see that as Emmanuel, God with us. Jehovah, Jesus, Joshua, Yeshua, Jesus saves. God with us. In God I will praise his word. In God will I put my trust. I will not be afraid what man can do to me. Remember, in God. He will talk about the Lord, but he'll also talk about his relationship with the Creator God who is for him. And again, splitting hairs that God, the Creator God of all, is for you. God, the covenant-making God, is for you. And then God, the intimate God, is for you. We've got so much for us. All we have to do is trust in these gods. For thou will deliver my soul from death. Wilt thou not deliver my soul from falling? It's funny. We'll trust him with salvation, but will we trust him to keep us from falling? Anyway, it's a beautiful psalm. Look through it, pull it apart a little bit. There's a lot to be seen here. I'd love to spend a lot of time on this stuff, but this whole series of videos is not here to do it all for you, but to give you an idea of what's on the grid. Going to 24, we just finished 22 and 23. 23 having to deal with establishing these feast days. And again, in a larger frame, going back to, we set up the the Ark of the Covenant. We set up the temple. We set up the courtyard. We set up the priest. We set up the sons of Aaron. We set up their epochs. We set up all of this. Then we consecrated all of that. We got that all settled. Now we're dealing with the nation. We set up medical laws. We set up economic laws, the shekel of the sanctuary. We set up different laws between people and people. We set up cleanliness guidelines for personal hygiene. And we set up also with how this works with the 4 different types of sacrifices you did, and how you did them, and when you did them, and why you did them. And then ceremonial cleansings for mistakes and trespasses that were made, but also punishment for breaking moral laws, and which would lead to death, the death of the person who broke the law. So we see all of that. Then he goes in, and now we're established is how the priest should handle their family relationships. We saw that in 22. Now in 23, establishing all these feast days. He's really building. He's really keep moving here. In 24, we're talking about how you deal with the oil and the showbread. The idea of, again, this perpetual oil, this perpetual light. There's always light going on in the temple. This isn't a fact of darkness. This isn't gloom. It's light to shine. And again, like I said before, if you light these candles in a room that's gold, you're going to have reflection go all around in every corner. And how you do the showbread, how you do not the showbread, how you do the bread, that there are 12 loaves representing God caring for the 12 tribes. The bread represents the wheat that was given by God to the people, and now it's coming back before God to show, yes, we recognize that you're the one that builds us and you're the one that sustains us. And it talks about that the frankincense, and there'll be pleasing aromas that go on. You would talk about a point of blasphemy. Here we had an Israelitish woman who was married to an Egyptian. Her and her son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed, and he was put into a ward. Now we're seeing the idea of this is the very first jail. Instead of them just jumping to a conclusion, they go to call upon the witnesses. They sequester him away in a ward. He's in jail. So we see that established. And God wants righteousness when dealing with sin. So, and he brings those, and they lay their hand upon his head, and they speak, and they tell the truth, and they say that this guy did blaspheme. And he goes into, you will kill a man for things that he has done. You will hold him ultimately accountable. Men cannot just do what they want. There is a sense of ultimate accountability. You even have that for beasts. That, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That if a beast has done this, he will be killed. If a man has done these things, he will be killed. And so we're having this manner of law set up. And they brought the guy out. The witnesses came forth. It was proven that he had cursed Yahweh, and he was stoned. And they did so. In 25, we're talking about, the Jubilee years. Now, this is economic, which is very good. We're not just going to have endless debt or endless control of the powerful over the powerless. Here, we have a sense to where the powerful are moving. They're working with the powerless. They're renting fields. They're purchasing people. And once again, this is not slavery. And again, even the sojourners, even the strangers were not considered slaves. You could not just grab them and use them how you want. When you had differing relationships with them and different purposes for them, but you also had to treat them with kindness. They still got Sabbath off. They still got refreshed. They had gleaning laws so that the poor could go and eat from the trees, that you didn't just raid everything. They also had the fair market of the shekel, that if someone came in to try to trade, that they trade with the fair shekel, even among the powerful. But we're looking at this from an economic. This 25 is a very strong economic, telling them how they should handle the purchasings, how you handle renting out a field. Okay, well, how much produce can I get? What's my yield going to be? How many years till Jubilee? So you figure out what you're going to make, so you could borrow only up to that point, or what you think you could pay back. How much profit do you think you can make? It's a business. So Jubilee is set to help the powerful, help the powerless, because God is the powerful one. We are the powerless ones. So he sets this up that you have a Sabbath of 7 days. And you also have the land will go through its period of Sabbath. But there will be a Sabbath of years. It says that when you'll 6 years you'll plow a field, and the 7th year you'll let it be vacant. The idea of a year, you can go ahead and take the nutrients for 1 year, for 6 years, but in the 7th year you let it regroup, and then you trust. See, later on you'll get into this, that you are to trust God, that if you stop harvesting in the 6th year, you will have made enough in the 6th to live in the 6th and 7th as you to live in the 7th, and then in the 8th you have to eat from what you had in the 6th, and then you eat from the 8th and the 9th. Gets a little complex, but look at it in here. God has set this up that I will give you sustenance enough that you'll be able to survive in the years you aren't sowing. And so he goes into that. He talks about the Sabbath for the land shall be made for thee, for thy cattle and for thy beasts shall be for your meat. And you'll count 7 Sabbaths, and after 7 times 7 years, in the space of 7 Sabbaths, that's the end of 49 years. In the 50th year is Jubilee. And they start over. They reset the economic clock. And whatever profits you made, you get to keep. And if you didn't make profits, you began again, you would get your land back. If you sold yourself to somebody and it wasn't in a bondship, it was just, I'm going to work for you till, okay, and they'd figure, okay, you can only work for me until Jubilee, and then they work that out of what your wages would be. So you got this sense of the setting up the Jubilee. The Jubilee shall be the 50th year, and you will not sow nor reap that which is grown of itself, nor gather the grapes in it. For this Jubilee is holy unto you, and you shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. In the year of Jubilee you shall return every man his possession. So if I had a field and I leased it to you, I would get the field back. If I had clothing that I leased to you, like a pawn shop kind of thing, idea, I would get that back. Anything that I've leased to you, if I've leased to you myself, I get that back. And you start over. And you count the years thereof. And if your dwelling is in a walled city, that's treated differently than if your dwelling is out in a land, that's treated differently. Houses, if you purchased, Levites were also treated differently at this time on how they purchased and how you dealt with them financially, because they were taken care of through the temple, and and what they owned was different. So there were different laws for the Levites. And as if the brother has waxen poor and fallen into decay, you will relieve him, that he may live with thee. The idea of this economy is not for me to gather for myself and shove it into a corner, that I may also be a benefit to my brother around me. That if I see my brother falling into decay, that I will work with him. Now, this isn't socialism. I just don't give to him. What do you have? What can you bring to the table? What can you bring that you and I might work together to benefit you and benefit me? This isn't socialism. This isn't a free lunch Friday. This is about the responsibility of every Israelite to work for his prosperity, to work with one another. You were not to take usury. You didn't have exorbitant interest rates. Again, the shekel was controlled at the temple. The men of God controlled the shekel. You shall not give him thy money with usury, nor lend thy victuals for increase. I am the Lord your God. Every time he says this, boom, he's making this in a point. Boom, circle it. You don't do usury. I am Jehovah, your Elohim. Boom. You could just circle those every time you see them. And so he gives these laws that if a brother do this, he talks about hired servants. And again, and he talks about bondsmen. Again, that your brother is not a bondsman. The stranger and the sojourner that comes in that doesn't want to be a part, then he will be considered a bondsman. But you are to consider your brother as a hired servant. And again, you deal with them contractually different, because one's a brother and one's not. And so he talks about that, but none of them are to be vexed. You'll see that do not vex. That means to, put your foot upon. That means to treat differently. You treat this person nice, you treat this person horribly. I can treat you horribly because you're not my brother. No, you treat them nicely because you remember that you were a slave in Israel, that you were a bond servant. You were not a hired servant. You didn't go into a contractual relationship with these Egyptians. They pushed you down and they told you what to do. Maybe you were a chamberlain. Maybe you worked out in the fields. It didn't matter. You had no freedom and no nothing that was actually yours. But here you're dealing with a hired servant. You can deal with bondsmen and bondsmaids. When it says you can buy them, once again, we in Christianity we in the 21st century have a hard time with, oh, you're buying. Let's stop and say, corporations purchase people. Here you're buying. You're telling these people. Remember, Jesus alluded to that in a parable where the man went and got men to work in his field, and one worked in the morning, one came in the afternoon, others came at noon, some came at 3 o'clock, and they were bonded to this thing. They were hired and offered a certain wage. They fulfilled the day, and then they went on their way. And some people did this daily. It's almost like staff employment, per diem payment for work. So you see this when you hire these people, when you're buying them. My boss bought me, my corporation bought me. You don't vex them, but here's how you could do, and here's what the responsibilities are. And again, many times we're seeing that when a man came into another man's household, he would work for that man, but the wages didn't go to this man. The wages went to the household, and in the household was where the man got his food and his water for his family. See, when I work for a corporation, the corporation gives me a wage, and I use the wage to buy food. Here, the man comes in and works. He creates increase for the master of the house, who provides the food and the water and all of those sustenance over here, and the man partakes also. It's a different thing. He's not paying the man, and the man goes buys this stuff. Now, if he wants to later on take his family out of that and try to do it on his own, he could do that. But it's, again, a different economic cycle. So we have to be careful when we look at 20th and 21st century economics in this and yell good and bad. Let's see what's really there. This man is happy to work and know that the apples and the figs and the pomegranates and the milk that's provided and the butter and also the health care, that's happening for his family is taken care of over here by the master while you're producing for the master. The master is doing what you would do had you had the power. Now, if the man wants to, if he can build up enough power to take his family out of that. But some people are like, I like the way things are going. The master is good. We have a hard part with the word master also. Well, we have certain things that we do that sound dictatorial, that sound, like a tyrant. But we have to be careful and see this economics for what's on the grid, not for what we superimpose onto it. Again, to release ourselves and see what's here. That God is setting this up so they would not do the usury, so they would not step on and vex the stranger, that they would not step on their brother and see themselves as a higher Israelite and a lower Israelite. And then here's the scum, the sojourners, the non-Israelites. Well, he's not wanting that to happen. So he's creating these relationships and covenant agreements between man and man for equity. And after he is sold, he may be redeemed again. This is an idea. If your brother sells himself to somebody, is indebted to somebody, let's say he owes 5 more years, you could buy your brother out of his indenturedness, whatever he would have brought in, you could buy him out and you could redeem him and free your brother and free his family. That is also possible. This could be by the uncle or by the uncle's son. You may redeem him, a close kinsman. We'll see this in the book of Ruth, that Boaz was a kinsman redeemer, that he was going to buy the field, but because the field did belong, Naomi was a part of it, and through marriage, legally, the Moabitess Ruth was a part of it. So Boaz used that to get Ruth into his family. We'll see that story later. But the idea, again, it falls from here that you can redeem people from their debt and pay them out. You couldn't do that in other cultures. Once you're a servant, once you're a slave, you're there forever. You are property. This is not property. Creating covenant is not with property. You create covenant with people. And he talks about working that out with Jubilee. And with the Jubilee, you reset the clocks. For unto me, the children of Israel are servants. This is something also we have to remember, that we think we're free as American Christians. We're not. We're servants. Paul calls us bondsmen. He doesn't even say that I'm a servant. He takes it down another level to say I am a bondsman. He didn't even see himself. Here was this Jew that was the Jew of Jews, and he was from the tribe of Benjamin, and he had all this stuff rolling. He was a Pharisee, and he didn't even see himself as a servant of God. He lowered himself to the fact that I am a bondsman. So we need to see that you are my servants who I brought out of Israel. And there is it again. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. I am Jehovah, your Elohim. Again, stating the reason why you're doing all of this. It's because you are my servants. You're not free people that just run around and do what you want. You are my servants. And we should choose to be the bondsmen of Christ, the bondservants, doing what we can for God in service of our neighbors. But again, looking at the economics here, it's very sound. It seems foreign to our ears, but this is why, again, we go to the grid. The grid will change your perspective. The grid will give you information. The grid will tell you where you're wrong. And the grid always tells you where God is right.